Introduction. Ladies and gentlemen, today I want to take you on a journey to a place few have heard of, but one that embodies isolation, despair, and absolute imprisonment. Petak Island, a small piece of land in Russia's Vologda region, known as one of the world's most inescapable prisons. Located in the middle of the White Lake, below Ozero, this island has served as a high-security prison, housing some of Russia's most dangerous criminals. Petak Island Prison, Russia's most isolated and inescapable prison. Petak Island Prison, also known as Ogneny Ostrov Fire Island, is one of the most feared and impenetrable correctional facilities in Russia. Located deep within the Vologda region, this high-security prison sits in the middle of the vast White Lake, below Ozero, completely cut off from the mainland by freezing waters and strong currents. The sheer remoteness of the island makes it a place where prisoners are not just physically confined, but also mentally and emotionally isolated from the outside world. Unlike traditional prisons, which rely on high walls, armed guards, and razor-wire fences to keep inmates inside, Petak Island's most formidable barrier is nature itself. The surrounding waters are not just a passive obstacle. They serve as an active deterrent to escape, as the icy temperatures make swimming across them virtually impossible. Even in the warmest months, the lake remains treacherous, with unpredictable currents that would quickly exhaust even the strongest swimmers. In the brutal Russian winters, the lake partially freezes, but the risk of death from exposure is even higher. Petak Island is notorious for housing Russia's most dangerous criminals, many of whom are convicted murderers, serial killers, and individuals sentenced to life imprisonment for the most heinous crimes. The prison has a strict no-exit policy, meaning that once inmates arrive, they are unlikely to ever leave unless in a body bag. It is a place where time slows to a crawl, and the weight of isolation presses down on every inmate. The prison's origins date back centuries, first serving as a religious monastery before being converted into a detention center. However, unlike the monks who once sought solitude here for spiritual enlightenment, the inmates of Petak Island experience isolation as a form of extreme punishment. They are subjected to harsh conditions, including tiny, cramped cells with minimal exposure to sunlight. Contact with the outside world is nearly non-existent, and strict regulations ensure that prisoners have little opportunity for interaction even among themselves. Petak Island Prison has been compared to the infamous Alcatraz, yet it is even more isolated and inescapable. Whereas Alcatraz was eventually shut down, Petak Island remains active, a silent, grim testament to Russia's unyielding penal system. The prisoners here are not only separated from society by walls and bars, but by an unbridgeable expanse of water that ensures their captivity is absolute. Petak Island Prison is located in the middle of White Lake, below Ozero, in the Vologda region. Petak Island Prison is uniquely positioned in the middle of White Lake, below Ozero, a vast body of water located in Russia's Vologda region, hundreds of kilometers from Moscow. This location was not chosen by accident. The Russian authorities intentionally placed the prison on a small, remote island, ensuring that it would be nearly impossible for inmates to escape. Unlike prisons that rely on perimeter walls and armed guards to contain criminals, Petak Island's most formidable defense is the lake itself, a natural barrier that isolates the prison completely from the outside world. White Lake is not just a scenic body of water. It is an unforgiving, desolate expanse that contributes to the psychological torment of those imprisoned on the island. Stretching over 1,284 square kilometers, 496 square miles, the lake acts as an enormous moat, making it nearly impossible for prisoners to even contemplate escape. The water is notoriously cold year-round, with temperatures dropping dangerously low, especially during the long Russian winters. Even in summer, when temperatures rise slightly, the lake remains unpredictable, with strong currents and frigid depths that can quickly lead to exhaustion and hypothermia. Beyond its size and freezing waters, White Lake is known for its harsh weather conditions. The region experiences long, bitterly cold winters, where ice forms over parts of the lake, creating an eerie, frozen landscape. However, this ice is not stable enough to walk on, preventing any chance of escape. In warmer months, the lake is often battered by strong winds and sudden storms, making boat travel dangerous. Even if an inmate were to somehow break free from the prison and find a way to the water's edge, there are no nearby settlements where they could seek help. Only miles of water separating them from the mainland. The Vologda region itself is known for its isolation and sparsely populated landscapes. Unlike major urban centers such as Moscow or St. Petersburg, Vologda is a remote part of Russia with dense forests, vast open lands, and extreme weather conditions that add to the island prison's natural defenses. Any escapee who somehow managed to survive the treacherous swim across White Lake would still face hundreds of kilometers of wilderness, with few roads, limited transportation, and harsh environmental conditions standing between them and freedom. Because of its location in the middle of White Lake, Petak Island Prison is not just a place of confinement. It is a place of absolute separation from the outside world. Inmates are not only imprisoned behind bars, but also by the very geography of the region, which ensures that their sentence is one of extreme isolation. The lake, with its vast, open waters, serves as a silent but ever-present reminder that escape is not an option. The island was originally a monastery before becoming a prison. Before Petak Island became one of Russia's most feared and isolated prisons, it had a very different purpose. The island was once home to a Russian Orthodox monastery, a place meant for peace, solitude, and devotion. This history is a stark contrast to its current role as a maximum security prison, where the concept of solitude has taken on a much darker and more punishing meaning. The monastery on Petak Island dates back to the 16th century, during a time when remote locations were often chosen for religious retreats. The idea was that isolation from the outside world would allow monks to dedicate themselves fully to prayer and spiritual reflection. The silence of the island, surrounded by the vast White Lake, created an environment of meditation and strict discipline, far removed from the chaos of the mainland. The monastery likely served as a refuge for those seeking a life of religious devotion, cut off from the distractions of society. However, over time, as Russia underwent political and social upheavals, the fate of the monastery changed. By the early 20th century, the Russian government began repurposing many religious sites, particularly following the Bolshevik Revolution in 1917. Under Soviet rule, religion was heavily suppressed, and many monasteries across Russia were abandoned, destroyed, or converted into prisons, labor camps, or military facilities. Petak Island's monastery was no exception. With its naturally isolated location in the middle of White Lake, the site was seen as an ideal place for detaining prisoners. It was first converted into a detention center for political prisoners, many of whom were victims of Joseph Stalin's Great Purge during the 1930s. The monastery's peaceful halls were turned into prison cells, and its place of worship became a facility of punishment. The transition from a religious sanctuary to a penal colony was brutal, as monks were either expelled or executed, and the island's new inhabitants were subjected to harsh imprisonment. As the years passed, the former monastery was further reinforced and expanded to function as a high-security prison. By the mid-20th century, it had become one of Russia's most feared correctional facilities, specializing in holding the country's most dangerous criminals. Unlike other prisons, which might see prisoners eventually released, Petak Island Prison became a permanent holding facility for lifers, people who would never see the outside world again. Although much of the monastic architecture has been altered to serve the needs of a prison, remnants of the island's religious past still linger. Some of the original stone structures remain, and there are reports of old Orthodox religious symbols still visible in certain parts of the island. However, these faded remnants of faith now exist in a place ruled by despair rather than devotion. The eerie transformation of Petak Island, from a monastery meant for prayer to a prison meant for suffering, is a haunting example of how time and history can reshape a place's identity. What was once a haven for spiritual enlightenment is now a fortress of isolation and punishment, where inmates experience solitude not by choice, but by force. It holds Russia's most dangerous criminals, including murderers and terrorists. Petak Island Prison is not just any correctional facility. It is a place reserved for Russia's most dangerous and notorious criminals. This high-security prison houses individuals convicted of the most severe crimes, including serial murder, terrorism, mass killings, and brutal acts of violence. The prisoners here are not ordinary offenders, but men who have committed crimes so grave that they have been deemed unfit to ever re-enter society. The vast majority of inmates at Petak Island are serving life sentences without the possibility of parole. In Russia, life imprisonment is considered a punishment for the most heinous crimes, and only a small fraction of the country's prisoners are sentenced to this level of punishment. Those who end up on Petak Island have often made national headlines for their crimes, cases that shocked the public and left entire communities in fear. Many of them are serial killers, individuals who have taken multiple lives over extended periods. Others are terrorists convicted of bombings, mass shootings, or attacks on Russian security forces. Unlike lower security prisons, where inmates might have opportunities for rehabilitation or reintegration programs, Petak Island is a place of no return. The men sent here will never be released, and most will die behind its walls. This reality creates a uniquely grim atmosphere within the prison. There is no incentive for good behavior, no hope of reducing a sentence through work programs or education. Only the slow passage of time in complete isolation. Security at Petak Island is extraordinarily strict, reflecting the dangerous nature of its inmates. Prisoners are kept in small, individual cells for up to 23 hours a day, with only 1 hour allotted for exercise, which takes place in tiny, enclosed yards surrounded by high walls. Even during these brief moments of outdoor time, prisoners are heavily monitored, and their movement is severely restricted. The psychological impact of being confined in such an extreme environment is severe. Many inmates develop serious mental health issues, including depression, paranoia, and even psychosis. Unlike in other prisons, where inmates might form social connections or find distractions in work and education, Petak Island's prisoners are subjected to prolonged solitude, with only the cold walls of their cells as their constant companions. Many of the men in prison here are considered too dangerous to be housed in regular correctional facilities, either because of their violent tendencies or their influence over other inmates. Some are former gang leaders or criminals with high-ranking connections to organized crime, making them a potential threat even behind bars. Others are extremists, individuals who have been convicted of acts of terrorism linked to radical organizations. The Russian government sees them as a permanent danger to society, which is why they are locked away on an island where escape is nearly impossible. Despite its high security, Petak Island is not a place of constant violence. The strict isolation of prisoners means that inmate-on-inmate attacks are rare, simply because prisoners have very little contact with one another. However, this does not mean that life inside the prison is any easier. The sheer loneliness, combined with the knowledge that there is no way out, creates a psychological burden that many prisoners find unbearable. Some have attempted suicide, while others have lost touch with reality due to prolonged isolation. This prison is the end of the road for Russia's most dangerous criminals. There is no redemption, no second chance, only the certainty of slow, isolated existence until death claims them. The prison conditions are harsh and isolating, with minimal outdoor time. Life inside Petak Island Prison is defined by extreme isolation, strict routines, and harsh conditions that leave prisoners trapped not only physically, but also mentally. The facility follows an ultra-high security model, ensuring that inmates, most of whom are convicted murderers, serial killers, and terrorists, have little to no interaction with the outside world or even with each other. The daily existence of a prisoner here is a slow, monotonous cycle of confinement, with minimal human contact and virtually no opportunities for rehabilitation. Each prisoner is confined to a tiny, individual cell measuring approximately 2 meters by 3 meters, 6.5 feet by 10 feet. The walls are thick and cold, the doors are made of solid steel, and a small barred window allows only a faint glimpse of the outside world. The cells contain only the most basic furnishings, a metal bed, a small table, and a sink and toilet combination. Everything is bolted down to prevent the possibility of self-harm or attacks on guards. Prisoners spend 23 hours a day locked in their cells, with only 1 hour of outdoor time permitted. However, even this outdoor time is severely restricted. Instead of being allowed into a normal courtyard, inmates are taken to small, enclosed concrete yards that resemble cages. These yards are completely walled in, with only a metal grating at the top allowing a small amount of light and fresh air to enter. Even here, movement is strictly controlled, and prisoners are kept under constant surveillance by armed guards. Due to the high security nature of the facility, inmates are not allowed to have direct physical contact with each other. Unlike other prisons, where communal areas allow for some level of socialization, Petak Island enforces near total isolation. Prisoners eat alone, exercise alone, and are transported through the facility one at a time. The only human interaction they experience comes from prison guards, and even this is strictly professional and limited to routine procedures. Meals are basic and repetitive, consisting of simple soups, porridge, black bread, and occasionally some vegetables or meat. There are no cafeterias or communal eating areas. Each prisoner eats inside their cell. Since many inmates serve life sentences, there is no incentive for good behavior that would allow for improved conditions or privileges. This means that every day is the same, locked away in a cell with no meaningful activity to break the monotony. Reading material is limited, and while prisoners can receive letters from family members, visits are rare and heavily restricted. Even when family visits are permitted, they take place behind thick glass barriers, with communication allowed only through intercoms. Many inmates, however, have long been abandoned by their families, and some go for years without any personal contact with the outside world. The lack of stimulation and prolonged isolation take a severe psychological toll on inmates. Many prisoners develop depression, paranoia, anxiety, and even psychosis due to the unchanging environment and lack of human interaction. Unlike other prisons, where work programs or educational activities provide a form of distraction, Petak Island offers nothing beyond the empty hours spent inside a concrete box. The strict regimen is designed not only to prevent escape, but also to break the spirit of the inmates, reinforcing the idea that Petak Island is not just a prison. It is a place of complete and irreversible isolation. Due to the high security nature of the facility, inmates are not allowed to have direct physical contact with each other. Unlike other prisons, where communal areas allow for some level of socialization, Petak Island enforces near total isolation. Prisoners eat alone, exercise alone, and are transported through the facility one at a time. The only human interaction they experience comes from prison guards, and even this is strictly professional and limited to routine procedures. Meals are basic and repetitive, consisting of simple soups, porridge, black bread, and occasionally some vegetables or meat. There are no cafeterias or communal eating areas. Each prisoner eats inside their cell. Since many inmates serve life sentences, there is no incentive for good behavior that would allow for improved conditions or privileges. This means that every day is the same, locked away in a cell with no meaningful activity to break the monotony. Reading material is limited, and while prisoners can receive letters from family members, visits are rare and heavily restricted. Even when family visits are permitted, they take place behind thick glass barriers, with communication allowed only through intercoms. Many inmates, however, have long been abandoned by their families, and some go for years without any personal contact with the outside world. The lack of stimulation and prolonged isolation take a severe psychological toll on inmates. Many prisoners develop depression, paranoia, anxiety, and even psychosis due to the unchanging environment and lack of human interaction. Unlike other prisons, where work programs or educational activities provide a form of distraction, Petak Island offers nothing beyond the empty hours spent inside a concrete box. The strict regimen is designed not only to prevent escape, but also to break the spirit of the inmates, reinforcing the idea that Petak Island is not just a prison. It is a place of complete and irreversible isolation. Escape is nearly impossible due to the freezing lake waters and strict security. Petak Island Prison is designed to be inescapable, not just because of its high security measures, but because of its geographic location and natural barriers. Unlike most prisons, where escape attempts typically involve getting past walls, guards, or barbed wire, Petak Island has an additional, far more daunting obstacle: White Lake below Ozero. The lake itself acts as a natural fortress, making any thought of escape a near-certain death sentence. The prison is situated on a small, remote island in the middle of the lake, completely cut off from the mainland. The only way to enter or leave the island is by heavily monitored boats operated by the authorities. These boats transport supplies, staff, and occasionally government officials, but they are always under tight security, ensuring that no prisoner ever steps foot on them. Even if an inmate were to somehow get past the armed guards, surveillance cameras, and locked gates, they would still face the ultimate challenge: the freezing, treacherous waters of White Lake. The lake is known for its extreme cold temperatures, which makes swimming for even a short period incredibly dangerous. During the long Russian winters, temperatures in the region drop well below freezing, often reaching -20 degrees Celsius, -4 degrees Fahrenheit or lower. This causes thick ice to form over parts of the lake, but not in a way that would allow an escape. The ice is too unstable to walk across, as it often cracks and shifts unpredictably, making any escape attempt by foot suicidal. Additionally, the bitter cold and strong winds make survival outside of a cell nearly impossible. In warmer months, when a lake is not frozen, the situation does not improve. The water remains icy cold year-round, and the distance between the island and the shore is several kilometers. Even a strong, experienced swimmer would struggle to survive in the freezing waters for more than a few minutes before hypothermia sets in. The currents are also unpredictable, and the vast, open landscape provides no cover for an escapee. Guard watching from the prison or boats patrolling the area would easily spot anyone attempting to swim across. Security inside the prison is just as formidable as the natural barriers outside. The facility operates under maximum security protocols, ensuring that prisoners have virtually no opportunities to plan an escape. Each inmate is kept in near total isolation, making it impossible to coordinate an escape with others. The cells are reinforced with thick metal doors, and prisoners are moved under constant surveillance. The prison itself is staffed by highly trained guards, many of whom are former military personnel. They are armed at all times, and their orders are clear: no prisoner must ever leave the island. Surveillance cameras cover every part of the facility, ensuring that no movement goes unnoticed. Additionally, any signs of unusual behavior or potential escape planning result in immediate punishment or additional restrictions. Even if, against all odds, a prisoner were to make it into the lake and somehow survive the swim to shore, their chances of escape would still be slim. The prison is located in the remote Vologda region, far from any major cities. The surrounding landscape is filled with dense forests, swamps, and isolated villages, with no easy access to roads or transportation. The moment a prisoner was reported missing, Russian authorities would launch an extensive manhunt, using helicopters, drones, and tracking dogs to comb through the wilderness. No successful escapes have ever been recorded from Petak Island Prison. It remains one of the most secure and inescapable prisons in the world, where the combination of natural geography, extreme climate, and high security measures ensures that no inmate will ever taste freedom again. Prisoners live in near total isolation, with limited human interaction. Petak Island Prison is not just a place of physical confinement. It is a prison of the mind, where inmates experience one of the harshest forms of isolation in the world. Unlike regular prisons, where inmates may interact with each other in common areas, workshops, or meal halls, Petak Island enforces near total isolation as part of its security and punishment system. For the men locked away here, the prison is more than just a series of barred cells. It It is an endless void of solitude where human contact is rare, conversations are minimal, and the outside world is little more than a fading memory. Each prisoner is confined to a small, individual cell for 23 hours a day, with only an hour allowed for outdoor time in an equally restrictive environment. The cells are cramped, cold, and barren, designed not just to contain inmates, but to strip them of any sense of comfort or normality. The walls are thick concrete, the windows are small and barred, and the only sounds prisoners hear are the distant echoes of guards' footsteps or the occasional creak of a metal door. Prisoners are not allowed to have physical contact with one another. There are no shared meals, no group activities, and no moments of casual conversation. The only people they see regularly are the guards, and even these interactions are brief and impersonal. Guards are trained to maintain strict professional detachment, never engaging in unnecessary conversation with inmates. Orders are given in short, direct commands, and any attempts by prisoners to initiate conversation are usually ignored. When prisoners are moved through the facility, they're always escorted alone, often in handcuffs and under armed supervision. They never cross paths with other inmates, ensuring that communication between them is virtually impossible. This extreme level of control prevents the formation of alliances or escape plans, but also deepens the psychological burden of confinement. Even during the 1 hour of outdoor time, prisoners are still kept isolated from one another. The exercise yard is not an open space where inmates can interact. It is a small, enclosed concrete area, more like a cage than a yard, with high walls and a barred ceiling. There is no view of the lake, no sight of the natural world, just gray concrete and steel. Prisoners can walk in circles or do simple exercises, but they remain completely alone. Mail is one of the few ways prisoners can maintain a connection to the outside world, but even this is highly restricted. Letters are heavily censored, with anything deemed inappropriate or potentially dangerous removed before it reaches the prisoner. Many inmates, however, lose contact with their families over time. Some are abandoned by relatives who want nothing to do with them, while others simply grow distant, realizing that they will never return to normal life. Visits are extremely rare and strictly controlled. When they do happen, they take place in small visitation rooms with thick glass barriers, preventing any physical contact between prisoners and their visitors. Conversations occur through intercoms, and every word is monitored. For many inmates, the few visits they receive in the early years of their sentence eventually stop altogether, leaving them in absolute isolation. This kind of prolonged solitary confinement has severe psychological effects. Many inmates suffer from depression, paranoia, anxiety, and even hallucinations. With nothing to do, no one to talk to, and no hope of ever leaving, time becomes meaningless. Some prisoners experience severe mental deterioration, losing their ability to think clearly or maintain a sense of reality. The human mind is not designed to handle such extreme isolation, and over time, many prisoners become completely broken, emotionally, mentally, and even physically. For the inmates of Petak Island, life is not just a prison sentence. It is a slow descent into loneliness and madness, where silence is their only companion and the walls of their cell are the only reality they will ever know. The psychological toll of life at Petak Island is devastating. Life in Petak Island Prison is not just about physical confinement. It is an unrelenting assault on the human mind. The extreme isolation, monotony, and harsh conditions make this prison one of the most psychologically punishing facilities in the world. Many inmates at Petak are sentenced to life imprisonment, which means they will never leave the island until they die. This creates a sense of hopelessness and despair that only deepens with time, breaking even the strongest individuals. One of the greatest challenges prisoners face is sensory deprivation. Unlike in other prisons, where inmates can engage in activities, work, or socialize, Petak offers nothing but endless hours of solitude. Prisoners spend 23 hours a day inside their tiny, concrete cells, staring at the same blank walls, with only minimal interaction with guards. There are no conversations, no distractions, No mental stimulation, only the slow, crushing weight of time passing. Over the years, psychologists have studied the effects of long-term solitary confinement, and the results are alarming. Prolonged isolation can cause severe cognitive decline, making it difficult for prisoners to think clearly, form memories, or even maintain a stable sense of self. Some inmates report feeling as though they are disappearing from existence, losing their grasp on reality as the days, months, and years blur together. Depression and anxiety are rampant among Petak's inmates. The knowledge that they will never be released, combined with the unrelenting solitude, leads many prisoners to sink into deep despair. Some refuse to eat, others stop speaking altogether, and many experience crippling panic attacks in their cells, despite having no one around them. The absence of social interaction prevents inmates from developing coping mechanisms, forcing them to battle their thoughts alone. Hallucinations are also common. After spending years in complete isolation, some prisoners begin to see or hear things that aren't there. They report whispered voices echoing through their cells, shadows moving in the corners of their vision, or the sensation of being watched, even when they are completely alone. These hallucinations are a sign of the brain desperately trying to create stimulation in an environment where there is none. The lack of control over their own lives further contributes to inmates' mental deterioration. Every aspect of their existence is dictated by the prison. When they eat, when they exercise, when they sleep. This total loss of autonomy can cause something known as learned helplessness, a psychological condition where individuals stop trying to improve their situation because they believe they have no power to change anything. Inmates become passive, emotionless, and indifferent, existing in a state of numbness that can last for years. Suicidal thoughts are common, and many prisoners attempt to end their own lives rather than endure the endless isolation. Some prisoners have been found starving themselves to death, while others have tried self-inflicted wounds or strangulation using whatever they can find in their cells. Because of this, guards conduct regular checks to prevent suicides, but this only reinforces the feeling of being constantly watched, adding to the psychological torment. Even for those who somehow manage to mentally survive for years, the damage is often irreversible. Prisoners at Petak Island lose basic social skills, becoming incapable of holding conversations or making eye contact. Their emotional responses become blunted, and some forget how to express themselves entirely. If they were ever to be released, which is unlikely, most would be unable to reintegrate into society. Petak Island does not just imprison the body, it destroys the mind, leaving inmates as mere shells of the people they once were. With no future, no human connection, and no escape, prisoners are left to face the most brutal punishment of all, complete psychological collapse. Harsh weather conditions make life even more unbearable. Beyond its high-security measures and extreme isolation, Petak Island Prison is made even more unbearable by the harsh, unforgiving climate of the Vologda region. The prison is surrounded by White Lake, below Ozero, a vast body of water that plays a dual role, acting as a natural barrier against escape and as a source of constant environmental misery for the inmates. The lake's chilling winds, extreme seasonal changes, and relentless humidity contribute to an already unbearable existence, making life inside the prison a test of both mental and physical endurance. During winter, which lasts for nearly 6 months, temperatures in the region can drop to -20 degrees Celsius, -4 degrees Fahrenheit, or even lower. The lake partially freezes over, but its surface remains unstable and dangerous, preventing any possibility of escape. The freezing temperatures seep into the thick stone walls of the prison, making the already cold cells feel like iceboxes. Prisoners are given thin, government-issued blankets, but they are barely enough to keep warm in such severe conditions. The cold is inescapable. There is no central heating in the cells, and inmates are forced to endure long nights shivering under inadequate bedding, their breath visible in the frigid air. Many prisoners suffer from frostbite, joint pain, and respiratory issues, worsened by the dampness that seeps in from the lake. The combination of cold, moisture, and poor ventilation creates an environment where mold and mildew thrive, further deteriorating the already miserable living conditions. For the brief summer months, one might assume conditions improve, but instead, they bring a new set of unbearable challenges. Temperatures rise, creating a hot and humid atmosphere, but the mosquitoes and flies that swarm around White Lake make it impossible to find relief. Inmates who are given their 1 hour of outdoor time must endure clouds of biting insects, which thrive in the wet environment. The stagnant lake air becomes heavy and suffocating inside the tiny, enclosed exercise yards, where prisoners are allowed to pace back and forth like caged animals. The humidity from the lake makes everything in the prison feel constantly damp. The walls, the bedding, and even the inmates' clothing. Mold and rot spread through the structure, creating an atmosphere of decay and sickness. Prisoners develop chronic coughs, skin infections, and respiratory issues, but medical care is minimal, and complaints about health problems are often ignored. Seasonal transitions are no better. Spring and autumn bring relentless rainfall, turning the island into a muddy, waterlogged wasteland. The damp air makes it impossible to dry anything, leaving prisoners perpetually cold and uncomfortable. The icy winds that blow across the lake in these months create a howling, deafening sound that echoes through the prison walls, keeping inmates awake at night and adding to their psychological torment. Even inside the cells, prisoners cannot escape the elements. The small, barred windows allow cold drafts to enter during winter, and in the summer, they let in stagnant, humid air along with the buzzing of insects. There is no temperature control, and prisoners must simply endure whatever the seasons bring. Unlike prisons in more temperate regions, where controlled climates and modern facilities offer at least some physical comfort, Petak Island provides no relief from nature's cruelty. For inmates who are already mentally and emotionally broken by the isolation, the unforgiving climate only deepens their suffering. The body weakens, the mind deteriorates, and the passage of time becomes an agonizing cycle of unbearable cold, suffocating heat, and endless discomfort. There is no escape, not from the prison, not from the isolation, and certainly not from the merciless weather that punishes them every single day. Petak Island Prison serves as a symbol of Russia's harsh penal system. Petak Island Prison is more than just a high-security facility. It is a grim symbol of Russia's unforgiving and merciless penal system, a system that prioritizes punishment over rehabilitation. For decades, Russia's prison network has been notorious for its brutality, extreme conditions, and strict control over inmates, and Petak Island stands as one of its most isolated and dreaded institutions. Unlike Western correctional facilities, which often incorporate educational programs, vocational training, and rehabilitation efforts, Russian prisons, especially those designed for the worst offenders, are structured around retribution rather than reform. In Russia, a life sentence truly means life behind bars, with little to no chance of parole or reduced sentences. The judicial system ensures that once a prisoner is sentenced to Petak Island, they are effectively erased from society, condemned to an existence of isolation until death. Petak Island follows the legacy of Russia's notorious penal history, which dates back to the days of the Soviet Gulags, a vast network of labor camps used to imprison criminals, political dissidents, and enemies of the state. While the Gulags were known for their forced labor and brutal conditions, Petak represents a different, but equally severe form of punishment, perpetual solitary confinement in an inescapable prison. The Russian penal system has long been criticized by human rights organizations for its harsh treatment of inmates, and Petak Island is frequently cited as an example of the extreme psychological and physical suffering imposed on prisoners. Organizations such as Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch have reported that Russian prisons often feature poor living conditions, overcrowding, violence, and lack of medical care. However, Petak Island is different. It is not overcrowded, nor is it plagued by gang violence like some of Russia's other high-security prisons. Instead, it is a place of total isolation, designed to break inmates slowly over time, stripping them of their identity, sanity, and humanity. The prison guards at Petak are trained to maintain absolute control over inmates. Unlike in lower security prisons, where some level of prisoner interaction or routine activities exist, Petak offers no opportunities for reform or improvement. Guards do not need to worry about rehabilitation programs or education efforts, because there are none. Their job is strictly enforcement and surveillance, ensuring that prisoners remain locked away in silence and isolation. This severe approach to punishment reflects Russia's broader attitude toward crime and justice. In contrast to countries that focus on reintegration and second chances, Russia's legal system is built on the belief that certain crimes, especially murder, terrorism, and violent offenses, deserve permanent punishment. The existence of Petak Island sends a clear message to criminals. There is no escape, no hope, and no redemption for those sentenced to life here. Additionally, Petak Island Prison serves as a psychological deterrent. The mere knowledge of its existence is intended to instill fear among criminals across Russia. The prospect of being sent to an inescapable island, locked away in solitary confinement with no human contact for decades, is enough to make even the most hardened criminals fear the consequences of their actions. In this way, Petak is not just a prison. It is a tool of control, reinforcing the power of the Russian state and its uncompromising stance on crime and punishment. However, the ethical implications of Petak Island's existence continue to spark controversy and debate. Some argue that no human being, regardless of their crimes, should be subjected to such extreme isolation, as studies have shown that prolonged solitary confinement can lead to severe mental deterioration, psychosis, and suicidal tendencies. Others believe that Petak serves a necessary function, ensuring that Russia's most dangerous criminals never pose a threat to society again. Regardless of where one stands on the issue, one fact remains undeniable. Petak Island Prison is not just a place. It is a sentence in itself, a slow, methodical destruction of the human spirit, where the walls, the silence, and the passage of time serve as the ultimate executioner. A prison without escape, a punishment without end. Petak Island Prison is more than just a facility. It is a living tomb where the harshest criminals are sentenced to an existence of isolation, silence, and psychological torment. Surrounded by the icy waters of White Lake, reinforced by Russia's unforgiving penal system, and built to ensure that no inmate ever sees freedom again, Petak stands as one of the most extreme and inescapable prisons in the world. For those locked within its concrete walls, time itself becomes their punishment. Day after day, year after year, they exist in a void, cut off from the world, from human connection, and even from themselves. The outside world moves on, but for the prisoners, time is frozen, their only companions being the endless silence and the slow deterioration of their minds. Some may argue that such criminals deserve no mercy, that they have committed acts so heinous that society must erase them from existence. Others question whether such an extreme form of punishment is ethical, whether condemning a person to decades of total isolation is not just a sentence, but a form of torture. Regardless of the debate, one thing is certain. Once a prisoner enters Petak Island, they are never truly alive again.